So, good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Cain, and I am fortunate enough to serve as the Government Information Specialist here at the Document Center at the University of Oregon Libraries. And I would like to take, before we get started talking about the State of Black Oregon community launch here in Eugene, take a moment to thank a lot of the folks that were able, who contributed to make this possible. And so first and foremost, I'd love to thank the Urban League of Portland for producing the report, coming down and sharing it here in Eugene. I'd love to thank the University of Oregon Libraries for hosting us and supporting this initiative, and for providing technical support and marketing as well. They did a fabulous job, so thank you guys. And I'd also like to thank our partners, the Department of Planning, Public Policy, and Management, who had a vested interest and were keen supporters from the outset of this initiative. So, just a quick overview. The State of Black Oregon is a report that the Urban League of Portland puts out every 5 years, looking at the lives and experiences of Black Oregonians across the state. Eugene is home to a vibrant Black community, and the University of Oregon is proud to be hosting Eugene's community launch. At this moment, I'd like to invite Adrienne Lim to come up and welcome us.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrienne Lim, and I'm the Dean of Libraries here at the U of O. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you, partners, community members, faculty, students, to the Night Library for this important event, which is co-sponsored by the Urban League of Portland, the Department of Planning, Public Policy and Management, and the libraries. This event honors the release of the Urban League's State of Black Oregon 2015 report. In many ways, this is a very sobering report, one that tells us how far we have to go to realize the dream of equity and inclusion in our state. But for me, and I hope for you as well, it is also an incredibly inspiring and hopeful report, in that it helps us understand exactly why there is an urgent need to continue the struggle towards social justice. It provides us with a roadmap with concrete policy actions that will help us address the many worsening racial disparities that Black Oregonians are experiencing in unemployment, health, education achievement, and other socioeconomic areas. I'm sure that many of us are looking forward to learning more about the report's findings tonight and discussing the ways that we can move forward together toward a more equitable future. At the University of Oregon Libraries, we care very deeply about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's in our library DNA to advocate for equal access to information, especially free and unfettered access to governmental and non-governmental reports and data sets that will help inform citizens and help citizens get involved in civic life. We in libraries want to help all human beings fulfill their potential, and we do that through education. We also believe that a crucial part of our role is to preserve and promote cultural diversity. In this realm, the UL Libraries has become one of the most important national centers for the study of women science fiction writers, for documentation on Latinos in Oregon, for collections on intentional communities, especially lesbian lands, and our special collections related to Black experience and history in Oregon include the African American Cultural History in Eugene Oral History Project, the Eva Rutland Papers, the NAACP Portland Branch Records, and much, much more. Through our work in our community interactions and in our handling of heritage collections, I think that we librarians can affirm and help document the ways that historic and institutional racism have affected many people and communities in Oregon and beyond. We can also preserve the stories about how those same communities and people came together to meet the challenges and overcome them with an admirable spirit of creativity, resilience, and determination, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. We are stewards of many information resources which allow people to learn about the world, including its many failings and possibilities. Helping researchers to make connections and discover new knowledge is an important part of any project where truth helps us achieve more progress toward our goals. We can all continue working to empower people. We can join together in advocacy and action to enhance racial understanding and improve the lives of all of our community members. Following me on the stage, we have an array of speakers and panelists who will inform and inspire us. And I thank you, all of the presenters and the participants tonight, for joining in, sharing your wisdom. I hope that as we spend time listening and engaging each other in discussion, we will ask ourselves sincerely, what can we do, each one of us, to make our state more equitable for Black Oregonians? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. So, at this time, I would like to introduce the new president and CEO, Cain Harmon Johnson of the Urban League of Portland. Harmon Johnson received a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Florida A&M University. She earned her Juris Doctorate from Howard University School of Law. Before Urban League Portland, she worked briefly for Kids Harbor, and she was also employed by the Obama White House. Excuse me. And for a few members of the U.S. Congress during her years in Washington, D.C. Also of note, she's the first president of the Urban League of Portland to be a native Oregonian. So please join me in welcoming Cain Harmon Johnson.
Good evening. Thank you all very much for being here. Dean, thank you for offering us this space and allowing us to use this beautiful room and to join you here in Eugene today. Jonathan, thank you very much for pulling this together for us. I'm very excited to be here. Tamika, will you do me the favor of introducing yourself so that we can let everyone know who we are? Okay.
My name is Tamika Taylor, and I'm the project assistant for the State of Black Oregon report. I've been working on it for about the last year and a half, and I'm happy that we're here to share this information with you, and thank you for coming.
So I have been the president and CEO of the Urban League of Portland for 6 weeks now. And I have the great honor of taking credit for this amazing report that took 2.5 years to pull together. So thank you for being here. Dean, you said truth-telling helps us move closer to our goals. I really like that phrase, and if you don't mind, I think I'll use it a time or two more. Because this report is all about truth-telling. We were just speaking a few minutes ago about how often we know there are problems, we have concerns, there are issues in education related to the criminal justice system, housing, workforce issues, and people lament the problems, but say, oh, it's just so big, or oh, we don't know really what the details are, the causes, what can we do? You know what, we should form a work group. Maybe we should put together a study group, or we need a task force. Government loves task force. And then nothing happens. We've all seen that time and time again because we just can't get to the root of the problem. Well, the State of Black Oregon 2015 report is about providing facts. It's about providing data. It's about providing the information we need so that we can move past the need for task force. We can move past the need for work groups and to study and to admire the problems that we all sort of have an inkling exist. It took 2.5 years to pull together the data, the facts, the figures. But that's not enough to tell the story of Black Oregon. As it turns out, there are African-American Oregonians in every county in our state. Who knew? Some of us. But other folks wouldn't believe it until they saw the cold, hard numbers. So it was important for us to not only pull together facts and figures, but to gather stories, to gather essays, to look at case studies of African Americans all across our state so that we could really add the color and the flavor to the data that we provide in this report. I should say before we get into the pages of the report that in the rear, Nyanga, on my staff, wave Nyanga so everybody can see you. Thank you. He will be happy to sign you up to buy a copy of the State of Black Oregon if you would choose to. They are $20. And I think we have a couple left. We nearly sold out our first week, but we went around the office and got them back from staff people so that we could have a few to bring to Eugene. So please feel free to see him before you leave this evening. Because I think you will find that this report is not only very informative, it's gorgeous. You can be forgiven for thinking that it's a coffee table book because there are many, many images in the book that capture more than the data, but really give the feeling about the people that we discuss in the report. And those are original images that were commissioned by and for the Urban League. So when the State of Black Oregon was published in 2009, it exposed racial inequities in every key social and economic area. Like everyone else, the Urban League of Portland looked at these issues in silos. We looked at education, we looked at healthcare, we looked at employment, issues that traditionally policymakers look at in these separate ways, bureaus, departments. But what we found as a community, as we began to work on these issues and to sort of look behind them, we found that you can't talk about employment without talking about education. And you can't address housing issues without talking about employment. So these things are clearly connected, but the way we talk about them was separate. That left us, frankly, at a loss to find solutions that would really work. So we took a different approach for this report. There we go. Here's a glimpse at some of the gorgeous images that you'll find in the pages of this report. What we did was to look at our state. We zoomed out. We didn't just look at Portland or North and Northeast Portland and start that way. We looked at the state of the whole and said, where can we focus on some areas to really tell the story? We spoke with Black folks across the state. We heard their experiences, we heard their stories, and we really wanted to reflect those in this report. Now, the 2009 report was good. Hopefully some of you are familiar with it and have seen it. If not, we have copies of that left at the Urban League, but it's also in our archives, which happen to be housed at OSU in their library. So we're also very fond of librarians. But in this report, we took pains to uplift the voices of elders, of the LGBT community, of Black immigrants and refugees as well. So it has a different lens than the 2009 report did. For many of these communities, sufficient data doesn't exist. So that's why it was so important that we get stories and we have essayists come and really talk to us about their issues so that we could share it with a broader audience. There was wide participation in pulling this report together, and that's why we feel it's a report for the community, by the community, and we're really excited to be in Eugene for this community launch. Some of you were with us weeks ago at PCC Cascade campus in Portland when we first kicked off and made the report public. But our plan is to take this report back to the places we went to put it together in the first place. Eugene is the first stop on our SOBO Roadshow. So thank you very much for helping us kick it off in fine fashion. There we go. So if there's one thing that you will take away from our discussion this evening, I would like it to be related to our elected representatives, our business community, and in fact, you as individuals. I want you to think about what all of those folks can do to help ameliorate some of the concerns that are highlighted in this report. Because what we found is that people are shocked by the numbers. They look at the unemployment numbers for African Americans. It's shocking. They look at the poor rates of high school graduation for African Americans, and they're saddened by it. They look at some of the healthcare issues that we see that are endemic in the African American community, and they're just disappointed by it. But we'd like folks to move beyond being shocked and sad and disappointed, to find action points. What can you do yourself? And we help you with that, because at the end of every chapter, there are action steps. So when you think about what can you do, and many of the people in this room, because I recognize some of the faces, are already engaged in their community as activists. We hope that you will take a look at what we have provided in the report and find some other things that you can do and ways that you can encourage people who aren't active enough to engage. When you encounter someone who says, it's a big problem, what can we do? When you encounter someone who says, it's Eugene and there aren't any Black people here, so we don't have to worry about this. We provide some action steps that you can share with them and say, you know what, I'm here and there are African Americans here, here's the data, and here's some things we can do to make the community better for African Americans, and in so doing, we'll make it better for everyone. That's something the Urban League it's part of our mission and part of our focus. The Urban League is 70 years old this year. That makes us one of the oldest social justice organizations in the Pacific Northwest, and actually one of the oldest on the West Coast. In Oregon, 70 years old, established in 1945 in Portland. So think about that for a little bit. When folks talk about Black Oregonians, they don't think about our history as being that deep and that old, although many of us know that it is, right? So we are part of a national organization. There are over 90 urban leagues across the country, but many are located in places like Los Angeles and Chicago, where there are clearly large African-American populations. So their experiences are different than ours. Their ability to mobilize is different than ours. But we hope that with the data that we have collected here, we are able to work in partnership with other organizations to create the kinds of results that we want to see for ourselves, for our families, and for the children to come. In this report, you will find deep analysis. There are 18 essays contributed by state and national experts in housing, in employment, in healthcare, education, and they provide a narrative that really give life to the report and put the research and the data in context. So even if you're not a nerd like me and don't take reports to your bedside table in the evening, you will find that this data and the information is very approachable. You will find that it's very useful. And we don't ask that you read the entire report in one sitting, although I think you might find that you do. But we do ask that you find the chapters that relate to your interests, find the chapters that relate to your work, and really give those a look. Maybe. There we go. Okay. Super.
All right. So speaking a little bit more to the framework, I'm going to explain a little bit about our approach and what we did. This framework has ultimately directed how we organize the report because people do not live in policy silos, like Nkenge said. We have used a framework that looks at the entire individual, family, and community through the 3 sections. We looked at children and youth, adulthood, and community. Through this lens, we have the opportunity to see how multiple systems, service agencies, and policies intersect with employment, housing, poverty, to create entire either opportunity or inequity for people in key stages of their lives. We use this lens because this is how we need to think about data collection, to look at the intersections of how poverty, food insecurity, prenatal incarceration, or parental incarceration impact the health of the mother and her babies 10, 20, 30, 40 years into their life, education outcomes, math and reading benchmarks, and ultimately grad rates, high blood pressure, diabetes, and other health-related outcomes. Again, we use this lens because this is how we need to inform solutions around how a first 1,000 days agenda can focus on strengthening the health of Black women, children, and families. Or a jobs plan for Black Oregon can lift up the Black workforce as an untapped resource for Oregon's growing economy. Anti-gentrification strategies can address urban renewal policies that continue to displace people of color. We also wanted to look at how all of these areas come together to affect overall economic security. We looked at progress, or lack thereof, in key areas such as median household income, where we saw a 22% increase for white families and only a 9% increase for Black families. Let me rearrange just a sec. We looked at unemployment, both locally and on the state levels, finding that unemployment in Oregon has reached 16%, and in Portland, a staggering 21%. We looked at the ways in which the Black community, which used to be centered in North and Northeast Portland, has been broken up and displaced to far East Portland. We know that high mobility and unstable housing affects education outcomes. It affects household costs and transportation to work. We also looked at other systems which disproportionately affect the Black community and presented barriers to employment and financial security, such as incarceration rates. Finally, we looked at how all of these racial disparities compound to form a wealth gap that is currently at crisis levels. Without progress in these individual areas, housing security, employment, health, this gap will only continue to grow. So then we asked the question, what does progress look like? What do we see now? For example, we see home ownership rates that are almost inverse that of whites. What we want to see parity in home ownership. The State of Black Oregon 2015 begins to outline some of those targeted interventions we need to begin to move the dial towards racial equity. The policy actions at the end of each chapter provide a framework and vision for those interventions. They also represent areas where we believe policymakers, the private sector, and public service providers need to apply their best thinking and invest in implementing change. And this leads us to our jobs plan, a jobs plan for Black Oregon. Oregon policymakers in the private sector are making plans to ensure that Oregon has a 21st century workforce that will keep the state competitive and prosperous. Even as the economy experiences steady improvement, Black unemployment is still more than double that of white Oregonians. Oregon is investing millions in workforce and skills development, technology, and training. But unless we are intentional about dismantling barriers to employment that Black workers face, our community will be left behind. A rising tide does not lift all boats, especially when those boats have holes in them. Holes of chronic unemployment, lack of access to effective job training or apprenticeship programs, higher rates of incarceration, and discrimination in hiring. The jobs plan that we present in the State of Black Oregon 2015 outlines strategies to overcome these barriers by specifically investing in targeted training programs to match high-wage, high-demand jobs, including culturally supportive programs and improved success rates, make sure that Black Oregonians meet educational goals for the state, make sure that the private sector reflects the racial diversity of the state, and that support the growth of Black business.
So what we're doing this evening is giving you an abbreviated summary of the State of Black Oregon so that we can have our discussion and not just stand at the microphone, talking at you. But I hope you were paying attention to the slides where Tamika talked about the fact that African Americans in Oregon are incarcerated at a rate that's 6 times higher than white folks in our state. That's a pretty big number, and it leads to all kinds of complications for our families. It leads to all kinds of impacts related to the ability to seek employment. So we have that cascading effect. If you can't get employment, then you can't have secure housing, and if you don't have secure housing, your health's not going to be all that great. One of the things that we found is pretty effective when we're talking to policymakers for whom some of this information is new, we draw that line for them. Because if folks are unemployed, they're going to be on public benefits. If they're on public benefits, that means they're receiving tax dollars and not paying tax dollars, right? So for policymakers, that's not such a good thing. For other taxpayers, it's not such a good thing. And for the folks and the families who it affects directly, it's obviously a terrible thing. So when we look at this report and we talk about the data, it's really important to look behind it and to connect those dots, because otherwise it's pretty easy to say, well, those are just numbers on a page, right? And we know that it's so much more than that, and the work that we have to do is important because we're talking about real people and real lives, and we can actually do something about the facts and figures that we see up on the screen. This is Oregon. It's not California, which is almost a country unto itself in terms of the size of its economy and the number of people in the state. It's not Washington State, which is outpacing us in many ways. Oregon's got a lot of territory land-wise. We don't have a lot of people. So when it comes to making change, when it comes to doing something different, we're absolutely able to do it if we put our minds to it. That's one of the things that I find to be hopeful about this report. Another thing that I want to share before we move on to the next piece of our program has to do with child poverty rates. So it turns out that Oregon is generally a poor state. We're not up there with some of the wealthier states in the country. But even knowing that, we find that 62% of black children in the state face poverty and food insecurity issues. Think about that number, 62%. When I saw it, I thought to myself, and no offense to those who may hail from these states, but this isn't Alabama and it's not Mississippi. How is it that in a fresh food state like ours, where you pass a farm stand in every other corner, where you drive up and down the road and you see actual places where real food is grown, that we can't manage to feed our children regularly and effectively? How is it that especially in our urban centers like Eugene and Portland, and for that matter Medford, because these are urban areas, that we still find that these food insecurity issues face our children? To me, it was shocking, because I don't think about Oregon that way. We're progressive. We're forward-thinking. We think of ourselves as being different than other places. But it turns out, when you look at the numbers, we're not all that different than Cleveland. We're not all that different than Birmingham. But we can be. And the work that it takes to do it, some of it lies in these pages. What's important about the report is not just that the Urban League of Portland has put it together, but that we're offering it to the community, because we know the work that's necessary is not just the Urban League's work alone. Certainly we work on workforce issues. We have a strong seniors program. And in fact, we provide services for folks all around the state. It's part of the reason we're in Eugene, because we want to hear from you to learn more about what we can do to provide services here in your community. But there are already lots of organizations. I see the president of the Eugene NAACP here. Hi. There are lots of organizations who are doing the work that needs to be done, and we hope through providing this information, the data, the analysis, even the storytelling, to push folks along and provide another resource that's necessary to help us move faster. To help us move faster. Because it's not enough for us to simply be shocked. It's not enough for us to simply be outraged. If we're back here in 5 years talking about the state of Black Oregon 2020 and these numbers look the same, then we have failed. But we don't have to. So thank you for coming tonight, because there's a role for everyone in this work. We have to call for greater accountability in our own communities, from ourselves, from the organizations that serve us, and that includes our schools, includes our companies. And we really need to focus on measurable results. So we invite you to review the report and find what is interesting to you and take that little bit away. We also invite you to contact the Urban League. Come visit us if you want, or we can come to you. Or find us online at ulpdx.org, ulpdx.org, so that we can work together on the issues that matter most in Eugene, in Springfield, and in surrounding communities. I'll stop there, Jonathan, and we can move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those first sobering statistics, but also that stirring call to action. Our next speaker is Greg Evans. Greg is an institution of community involvement. He's a coordinator of African American student programs at Lane Community College. He serves as a councilman for the city of Eugene, runs the Rites of Passage program, and serves a critical role in the community. We're lucky enough to have him and one of his case studies in our 2015 report. Please welcome Gregory Evans.
Well, now that I've done one adjustment, I've got a couple more to do. Welcome and congratulations, President Johnson, on your appointment. And I know that we're looking for big and important things coming out of the Urban League in the years to come under your leadership. But one thing I do have to tell you, though, is that I was born and raised in Cleveland. And I have a son that recently was working in Birmingham, Alabama. So I'm very familiar with the plight of African Americans, not only in the state of my birth and where I grew up, but also across the country, and intimately aware of what has gone on and continues to go on in the state of Oregon, and in particular in the city of Eugene. One of the things that you mentioned and you talked about before I get into my remarks is the state of food security in our state. One statistic that many of you might be interested in and might be surprised at is the fact that 94% of the food that you consume, if you live in the city of Eugene, in the Eugene-Springfield metro area, comes from San Francisco. Only 6% of the food that we consume in this area comes from the local farm economy. So there is a big move right now in terms of assuring food security for all of us in our local communities, and in particular in a community like Eugene that is surrounded by rich farmland and produces a lot of vegetables, also sheep farming, and a number of other food-related businesses and industries. As a matter of fact, right now, the Lane County is embarked on a mission to export our food economy across the country and the world, and has looked towards branding the South Willamette Valley as one of the places that is a place to be as far as food. So Oregon wines are up there. Now Oregon beer is up there. Soon to come will be Oregon foods. But we need to make sure that we have that food security for folks here in our local communities, not only in the Eugene-Springfield area, but around the state. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the case studies. And one of the case studies that you will see in the state of Black Oregon 2015 is on a program that I founded and now have operated for the last 19 years now, almost 20, called Rites of Passage. We founded that program with three of us back in the year 1996, and we have had cohorts each of those years all the way up till this year, and we will continue with that program this year and hopefully into the far future. It is housed at my employer, Lane Community College, where I teach in the social science department, and I'm teaching a course, by the way, that is really kind of, folds into what the theme is tonight, which is the myth of a post-racial America. And if anybody knows what has happened in terms of the dialogue and the lexicon over the last 6 or 7 years about race in this country, a lot of you may have noticed that somewhere around 2008 and 2009, we were declared to be over the civil rights movement, and that we had moved into a post-racial America with the election of Barack Obama as our first African-American president. And many of you know, living in this country, living in this state, and also watching the news over the last year and a half to 2 years of the killings of African-American young men and women across this country by police departments all over the place, a fact that has continued to go on, and we told folks this back when I was a kid in the 60s in Cleveland. This is something that's not new. It's just being shown on TV, live, and going on and moving on and on in terms of the images that we all see on a regular basis now of police brutality in our communities and the fact that our communities are under siege. This is also a fact in Portland. It has happened numerous times. So this is nothing new for us. But to my remarks, so I was asked to address specifically 4 points with regards to the case studies. And the first point that I'm going to address is why this report is important in terms of the statewide focus. The reason why this is important in terms of statewide focus, I'm going to take you back a few years. When I moved to Oregon in 1986, 29 years ago, there were people from Ohio that I knew, grew up with, and worked with that said, there aren't any black people out there. Aren't there only black people that playing for the Trailblazers? You know, that was the image. That was the way that people viewed Oregon in terms of its black population specifically and its minority population in general. And no, there were not a lot of black people when I moved here in Eugene, 29 years ago, and there haven't been that many more. But as I go around the country, and I've been on different boards and organizations, I'm in the National League of Cities now as a city councilor, I do tell people there are black people everywhere in all 36 counties in the state of Oregon. I tell them there are even black people in Montana. I've met them. So, the fallacy that we are under, that there are places where we're not supposed to be and not supposed to live, is totally false. And what we have to do is we need to stand up and be accounted for in all of our communities. One of the things that I have seen going across this state over the 30 years is that I've run into black people in Astoria, into Umatilla, to Bend. A lot of you may or may not know that Myrlie Evers Williams, the widow of civil rights leader Medgar Evers, lived in Bend for a long time. Her second husband came to Bend many years ago, loved it, convinced his wife to move there. They had a house there. I visited there many times. And just in the last few years, as she's grown a little bit older, she's moved to Los Angeles to be closer to her kids. But she still calls herself an Oregonian. And so I say that to you to say this. We need to understand the conditions that African Americans live under and work in this city, or in this state. And we need to understand the many guises that we come in terms of who we are and what we do. There are black cowboys, there are black fishermen, there are black loggers, there are black people in every walk of life and in every profession that you can think of that is stamped as being Oregon. We are Oregon, and we need to claim that. The second issue that I'm going to address this evening is what are the values in the case studies in these reports? And I'll talk about this from the perspective of my program. The Rites of Passage program that we started was started in 1996 ostensibly to address some of the major issues that African American students were having in our school systems at that time and continue to this day. And those issues were directly related to positive self-image, self-esteem, and having a concept of black people that was not negative. We have a lot of children in our communities in this state that don't believe in themselves, believe the stereotypes, believe the garbage that is fed to them by their classmates and oftentimes by their teachers in their classrooms. Maybe you could imagine some of the horrific things that have been said to our children in this state. I have raised 4 children in this state, and I know what has happened to my sons. And I know when they've been called the N-word in kindergarten. And when you have to I'll tell you this story real quickly. It's a little off the deal, but it's within my time frame up here. But when my youngest son was 6 years old and in the first grade at Eastside Elementary School, which was one of the upper crust elite public elementary schools within the school district 4J, Eugene School District, I picked him and his brother up, my other son, from school on a rainy afternoon, and we were driving down the street and was coming down Willamette Street. Those of you who are familiar with Eugene, you know where Willamette Street is, the main drag in Eugene. And out of the clear blue sky, my 6-year-old son said to me, "Daddy, I don't want to be black anymore." So to keep from crashing the car, I pulled it around the corner and parked on the side street. And I turned around and I looked at him. I said, "Keenan, why did you say that?" He says, "Because nobody likes black people." That's the message he got in first grade at the liberal elite elementary school. And it's one of the reasons why we founded Rites of Passage, was to debunk the notion that there was something wrong with you because you were black. There is nothing wrong with you because you are black. And so I have worked with my sons, I have worked with other people's children over the last more than 20 years, because we have worked with the NAACP in establishing an AXO program, back to school, stay in school program here. Yes, we have all of that here, as well as the Rites of Passage program to address the needs of our young people and youth, because they need to know that there is nothing wrong with themselves, and they need to know that they should, can, and are supposed to believe in themselves and know that they have a future in this state and in all of our communities in Oregon. The third bullet that I want to address, and I'm coming to the conclusion of this, is the importance of cultural diversity in youth success. Let me tell you something. Learning about African Americans is not just about teaching our African American children, it's teaching all children about our culture. They need to know it. Because I have taught at Lane Community College for 20 years now. And I have taught students white students that were completely clueless about the diversity of America. And those students that were open, that were shocked to learn the things that they never learned in elementary school, middle school, or high school. And to tell them that if they wanted to go outside of the Eugene bubble, and they were going to move to other places in the country where there were more people that looked like me than looked like you, that you're going to have to learn how to deal with everybody. And that requires learning, consistent and constant learning, and an acquisition of knowledge that allows you to navigate and negotiate the society and the community that you live, work in, and raise your children in. That's what this is about. It's not just for our children, but our children are the primary focus for what we need to do and who we need to address. Because year after year after year, they're getting the same messages that my son Keenan got in first grade. And by the way, in 2 weeks, he will graduate with a bachelor's degree from this university. So, proud of that. And he is also an alumni of Rites of Passage. My other son Malachi is an alumni of Rites of Passage. And he's going to be graduating from boot camp in the Air Force in 2 weeks. So I've got most of my children grown and out of the house. And, you know, somebody asked me the other day, said, so your kids survived Eugene? And I said, no, my kids thrived in Eugene. And we have a lot of good people, a lot of goodwill, not just in the African American community, but in the Latino community, the white community, the Asian communities within this community that have helped and supported our children over the years. Not only do we have a Rites of Passage program for African Americans, but we have established one for Native Americans, which is Bridge of the Gods, and is connected to Lane Community College and the University of Oregon. We have a Latino program called Puertas Abiertas, Open Doors, which is also connected in collaboration with the University of Oregon. And then we also have our Pan-Asian American program. All three of the companion programs to the African American program sprouted from the African American Rites of Passage program. And we have had over 600 African American students to date that have successfully navigated, negotiated, and graduated from our Rites of Passage program here in Eugene. And so we have also exported it to other states. There are programs up in Washington State, in the Spokane community colleges, at Peninsula Community College, up on the Upper Peninsula of Washington State. And for a short time, I believe there was, and I'm not sure if it still exists, there was one at Clark College over across the river from you folks who are from Portland in the Vancouver school districts, and led by the NAACP in Vancouver. So, we have grounded this program not in something that we pulled out of the air, but in theory that has been established for over 60 years. Some of you are familiar with the work of Dr. Kenneth Clark. Others of you may or may not be familiar with the work of a gentleman by the name of Bill Cross from NYU, who established the theory of negrescence, the process by which someone attains a racial identity, and specifically in this case, a black identity. Because we have to have two identities in this world, particularly in this country, because we need a black identity to be able to have self-esteem and self-purpose and a positive self-image in a world that still is hostile to our existence and our presence and our power. The fourth thing that I want to touch on, and I'll conclude with this, is why programs like Rites of Passage and other programs like the AXO program, and I know that there was that robust AXO program in Portland for many years. Lucius Hicks led that program for many years in Portland. And why are these programs key to, the success of our African American youth and keeping our youth out of, criminal justice facilities and, other systems that are not favorable to our children? And again, I can't underline this any more than I already have. It is critical for us to build a framework for our children's success. And I say this to my students quite often, and most of my students are white. I tell you, I say, if you're white, you don't get up in the morning and think about being white. You don't have to think about your humanity because your race is synonymous with your humanity. We have been taught in this country that our race, our color, as African American people, is provisional. It makes us provisional human beings because everything is always prefaced with black, African American, colored. You're not prefaced. We are. And so as we struggle to work with the established American paradigm, which is basically Eurocentric, we have to carve a place at the table for all of our people, not just the ones who make it to Harvard or Stanford or are able to become law professors, judges, doctors, other professionals that have been able to fight through the system, but for everybody. And we need to have the opportunity and the access to education, health care, jobs, affordable housing that many of us do not enjoy today. So I'll leave you with this last note. I am really pleased and honored that the Urban League has asked me to talk on this subject. And as an aside, I also have used the 2009 report in many of my classes. And I know that I'm going to use the 2015 report in my current and future classes. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I want to thank the Urban League for all of the hard work that has been done. Katie Zawicki, I don't see you in the room, but she came down with some other folks, and we had some meetings, and we talked about what it was like to be black in the Eugene Springfield area, what our challenges were, what our victories were, what were our ongoing concerns. And I think that that has helped to frame and shape a report that is reflective of all black Oregonians. Don't be discouraged by the numbers and the disparities in the numbers. Look at the successful stories that are told in this volume, because those stories are the stories that we need to build on, that we need to expand, and that we need to encourage to grow for not only Oregonians now, but for our Oregonians in the future generations. My children, my grandchildren, your grandchildren. This makes us a stronger and better Oregon. Thank you.
To come back to the podium, I can only think of saying thank you. Thank you very much for your stories and your words, and thank you very much for your actions and your labors. Our next speaker, Dalton Miller-Jones, has been critical in the last two State of Black Oregon reports. He has been a professor of psychology at Portland State University since 1991 and was also the founder of the Africana Studies and Research Department at Cornell University. He is currently a professor emeritus at Portland State University. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dalton Miller-Jones.
Well, Professor Evans, it's very hard to follow you. I want to say a couple more things about me because you just got the academic resume. What the other part of my background is, in 1963, as a student at Tufts University in neurophysiological psychology, I was asked to step out of that role and become the director of the Northern Student Movement, which was an arm of SNCC. We, in the Boston area, had an extraordinary racist system at work, blatant and unapologetic. So we, along with the religious leadership in the city and the 640-some students who, from all the colleges, came into Boston to tutor in the settlement houses and housing projects and homes of students who were being absolutely neglected in the schools. That was my maiden voyage into action and community development work. Yes, Barack wasn't the only one. But after a period of time doing that, I had two children. It's time for me to make a living. So I went to work as a science curriculum developer, and from there went on to finish my doctorate at Cornell University in developmental psychology. But, of course, they were bringing students to that campus, much as they bring African-American students to University of Oregon and Oregon State and all the other universities, without a single recognition of the need to incorporate into any aspect of that curriculum something about who they were and what was their history. And by the way, there were very few scholars, in fact, at the time writing about this whole domain. And so the Africana Studies Center emerged after the students took over the student union and armed themselves. I was not in the building. They sent me in to negotiate with the president to get the program established. But there was action for me, and that continued through most of my career. And I just want to say that because I never have enough time, this report is a curriculum, and it ought to be a course, not a presentation in snippets, but a systematic examination of all of the various levels of programmatic efforts to impact and improve the lives of African Americans, certainly in the first case, but also other Oregonians, especially those who are disenfranchised and don't have power. Native American communities in this state, rural poor. One of the things that happened for me was an appointment to at that time, the Board of Higher Education. And that board was a significant body at the time. It's now no longer. I don't want to go into the politics of that, but I will tell you that as part of that board, we developed a set of diversity action items that we would use to hold university presidents accountable for certain diversity and equity goals. There were guiding principles. I'll just quickly mention them because this is where you are. And we no longer have a means to act on these. These are at the Urban League. They're part of the first Urban League report, along with a couple of other reports out of our committee, which was to increase access and success in the university system. Principle 1, overall commitment to diversity. Actions. The board, the chancellor, and campus presidents will identify opportunities and promote expectations for diverse representation, inclusion, and engagement throughout the Oregon University system's programs and activities. And the universities will have to annually report on their success in achieving that. Second guiding principle, these were developed by Yvette. Oh, man, she worked in the chancellor's office here. Very dynamic. Yes, thank you. You've been here a long time. And by Preston Pulliam, the then president of Portland Community College, and myself. I'm not going to take the time to go over these. There are 7 action principles that need to be enforced. And they no longer have any carry, because there is no board of higher ed. The universities have their own boards, and nobody is responsible for anything like this. Because I never have enough time, I always run out of time before I get to my conclusions and recommendations. I want to start with them. And they basically address the question, what can I do? And there are at least 3 things. First, I want you to, I forgot to do this. Thank you all for being here. It shows that you are extraordinary, that you will take the time out of this time in your lives to be here, to listen, and to participate, because I'm going to cut my comments short so that we get to some interactions. I think this is really important for us to do. Read and digest the report. Really take the time. There's really a lot of thoughtful, careful analysis, and the appendices are where all the nerds should go. Like me, because that's where the numbers are. And the numbers are the data, they're the accountability. Look at that report. Second, find any one of the hundreds of action recommendations and commit to engaging with one of the organizations that is listed in here to work on any one of those. But choose one and do it. Don't just think about it. Act. Third, you have to participate in building community. I heard the positive comments from Professor Evans. I wish that my world that I see were as positive. I know that people are doing heroic things, but I also know that there are children growing up here in Oregon who have no direction, who have nothing to attach to, like the Axel and the Pathways programs and so forth that you've just been hearing about. What about them? How do we reach them? What organizations are dealing with them? Some of the ones that in my essay I mentioned, Self-Enhancement Incorporated in Portland has been extraordinarily successful, all the way to building a school. From an after-school organizational program, they really are there as a bulwark for identity for African American and other cultural children. We are going to hit a place here in the road that's going to be very awkward, because most of us are for a diverse curriculum. All the research that I know of, including the work that I've done, suggests that you can't do a diverse curriculum in general. You have to have culturally specific curriculum so that African American kids are knowing you're talking about them. And you have to address some dynamics that are very uncomfortable. And let me turn, so participation in community building and community cohesion. For most of us, the present situation has its roots in historical experiences and forces. In my essay, I attempt to make the case that experiences of violence directed at African Americans over generations has a lasting and current impact on the parenting practices of African American mothers with their daughters and their sons, and those practices differ for their daughters and their sons. But the past is a pulse that's throbbing in our communities. By now, if you're not aware that for African Americans, America has been a police state for 400 years. One of the presenters a few minutes ago mentioned that you can't avoid the news now because everybody's talking about it, because the social media, cell phones are there. But before that, it was currency in the black community. When I was growing up, that was the discourse, the social coinage. How do you deal with the arrest? Third grade, Bootsy said when he got stopped outside at 5 and 10, I ain't doing nothing till I talk to my mouthpiece. That's his lawyer. Third grade. I suggest that you all go on the internet and find the rise and fall of Jim Crow and pay attention to two things: the visual images that they present around lynching and the beating of slaves and the lynching of African people in this country all the way up into the 50s. I think actually 1960 there was one in addition. You have to ask yourself, if you were black and this was happening to you and you couldn't go to the police or any other authority, what would you do? You understand the miracle and the genius of African Americans that after 300 years, 10 generations of not being allowed to read, be taught to read, to be able to do mathematics, that there were African Americans in 10 years building universities, building cities, having our own businesses until they got burned down. It's miraculous. There's genius out there. There's genius in the children that I work with in Portland. I work with another organization called REAP, Reaching and Empowering All People. They tried to put a Black Studies program into the high schools, and I was that time chair of Black Studies at Portland State, and my faculty and I came into the schools to work with those students, and we did, this is like curriculum. We showed them Jim Crow, we showed them old films like Darrell Milner just doing his Black film courses, and these kids were revolutionized. There was about 10 or 12 of them at U of O subsequently. Let me get back to my written comments here because I want to quickly move from here to an open discourse. You have to understand, I think, that those overt acts of aggression are reinforced daily by what Daryl Sue and others have called microaggressions. I had one yesterday. I went into a restaurant with some friends who were staying over with me, and the person who seats you, the hostess, acknowledged me standing there and said, "I'll be with you in just a moment." In the meantime, a young woman came in with 2 kids, and do you know, right past me and sat those people at a table. Now, the point isn't that it happened. The point is, what do you do? What's the impact on the psyche? You mentioned my brother Bill Cross, who took my job at Cornell, actually, and he wasn't at NYU. He was at City University of New York Graduate Center. No. The CUNY Graduate Center. That's where I came from to come to Portland State in 1991. He took my job at Cornell, and then he followed me to there. So I know Bill's work very well on identity. Okay. The Tuskegee Institute documented the lynchings of 3,446 African Americans between 1882 and 1968. While lynching is one of the extreme forms of macroaggressions used to intimidate and to reinforce white supremacy, and that's what it's about. White supremacy and power. There are many other tactics used that instill submissive compliance in black citizens, including raids by hooded white KKKs and police intimidations that you all see practically daily. In the past decade, 9 unarmed black men were killed by police. Timothy Stanberry in Brooklyn, New York, January 2004. Sean Bell in Queens, New York, November 2006. Oscar Grant in Oakland, California, January 2009. Aaron Campbell, Portland, Oregon, January 2010. Alonzo Ashland, Denver, Colorado, July 2011. Wendell Allen, New Orleans, March 2012. Jonathan Farrell, Charlotte, North Carolina, September 2013. Eric Garner, Staten Island, New York, July 2014. Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, August 14. And now you have to add 4 more, since I compiled this in August a year ago. The irony is that the nation's attention to official sanctioned use of force in St. Louis County is not lost on historians like Blair Kelly, who reminds us St. Louis, Missouri is where Dred Scott sued for his and his family's freedom. Supreme Court Justice Roger Tenney argued that Scott, as a black man, was never intended to be included in the Declaration of Independence. Supreme Court. Tenney wrote, "It is too clear for dispute that the enslaved African race were not intended to be included and to form no part of the people who framed and developed this Constitution, and that black men have no rights which white men were bound to respect." From 2006 to 2012, a white police officer killed a black person on average at least twice a week, every week. Not unarmed, but black people. Every year. Now, I could go on. This was my original essay. They asked me to do 600 words, and it came in something like a book. I do want to stop and engage, but my point in raising all this for you is to understand that you are dealing with a dynamic that is complex and historical in origin and is not going away. Black young men have an attitude, as you can see if you watch any of them walking. You know what I'm talking about. And they'll bite their lower lip too. I have an attitude. And that attitude starts just about kindergarten. Just about kindergarten. When they confront most of them for the first time, either a white or a black adult authority telling them what to do. We could go into this in more detail. I'm just trying to point out that we don't have all the answers. We do need to engage these kids. We do need you to participate. Read the report. Find an action agenda that you can relate to and identify with, and participate. Do it. Be there. And I thank you for listening to me and coming to this presentation.
All right. Since we're running a little long, we want to move ahead to the discussion portion. So I'm going to ask Ianga and Nakenge to come up and facilitate that discussion.
I'm so glad I work with you. There we go. As we get ourselves settled.
So, greetings everyone. Excuse the glasses. Even though the report is, the facts and figures are staggering, we still have a bright future. So that's why I got the glasses. I'm the organizer for the Urban League. I've been with the league next month, like a year. And as an organizer, I always want to know what's going on, wherever I go. And so that's why I'm here. I just want to see, are there any issues that people are organizing around here on campus or in Eugene? And the second question, is there any support that the Urban League can do or any other advocacy organization can come down and help you out with? And so I'll start off with the first question. Anything going on out here? As they say on the street, what's popping? Anything? Nothing?
Folks are going to be quiet, so I'm going to invite you to join us to talk a little bit. One of the things I think is important to share is I don't live in Portland. I'm the president of the Urban League of Portland. That's what its name is. But I live in Salem. I live in far south Salem. In fact, I live closer to where we are right now than I do my office. So when we come here to ask these questions, we mean it. We're not being paid to be here, other than what we make to do our jobs on a daily basis. We actually are interested. The other thing I want to share is this. Professor, you mentioned earlier, Professor Evans, you mentioned Lucius Hicks, and you were talking about the AXO program that the local NAACP runs. One of the things I love about the African American community in Oregon is how interconnected we are. Lucius Hicks was my mentor for a decade. We lived 2 doors down from each other in Portland, and I was an AXO kid. I was the first gold medal winner from this state to go to National AXO and then to win a gold medal there. The second one is in Eugene, and I met her last summer. Right? So when we come here to talk about issues and to ask questions, it's because we actually care and it really does matter to us. So I would ask you to engage, have a chat, give a thought, tell us something that you'd like us to know, because we're here to listen. And I figure, although you're here to listen, you're also here to share some information and some of the ideas that are in your head. Right? Okay. I see you nodding. Please.
I think I seen a hand in the back.
Sir?
What? Oh.
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to offer has to do with a point raised, I think, by your last speaker, and that is the problem of working to build coalition with people of color in general, which is really not easy, but can be done. I've had some experience when I grew up in Seattle and was active during the mid-60s. So it is possible, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of hard work to build bridges, particularly between people of color, I would argue, particularly between people of color, to build coalitions to deal with some of the problems that you've been talking about this evening. So I would offer that as a comment which I hope adds to the discussion.
It does, and I appreciate that. One of the great things about being an Oregonian, quite frankly, and in our small numbers, is that we have to work together to get things done. The other thing is sometimes we get lumped in as a kid who grew up in Portland public schools and whatnot. I was a student of color. Right? I didn't become an African American student until I went to a historically black university. That was a big deal. But I think nowadays, and it started when I was younger, folks are working in coalition at a younger age, so we're growing them that way. And certainly with the help of social media and the way that we talk to each other and interact in that space, some of those walls are brought down, even for folks who are younger than me in ways that I don't understand. So my hope is that coalition building becomes easier. Because here's the simple fact is this, right? And not just among people of color, because if you look at the report, what you'll find is the facts and figures we talk about also affect rural Oregonians. They affect lower income and even middle class white folks in our state. It's shocking. So when we talk about building the coalitions that are necessary to create the kind of change that we want to see in our state, we're talking about doing it for all people. One of the really staggering figures in this report, and we don't show that contrast in here, but I noticed it just from sort of because I'm a nerd and I do this kind of research. If you look at the rates of for prenatal care and what's the other thing I'm talking about? Birth rates. Thank you. For African American women in North and Northeast Portland, and you look at the rates for rural white women who live in rural counties in Oregon who are white, the challenges they faced numerically, they're the same. You wouldn't think that someone in Umatilla County would have the same problem as somebody in Northeast Portland when it comes to getting prenatal care. But they do. So the things we can do to make, to resolve these issues, to make things better, won't just help white folks, won't just help black folks, they will help Oregonians generally. So one of the great things about this report is to call that out, and so that people can understand that when you're doing this work, be selfish. Don't do it for black folks, don't do it for me, do it for yourself. Do it for the state that we call home because it matters for all of us. That's one of the messages we're trying to share when we talk about this, because it's the Urban League of Portland's report, but the work belongs to all of us.
I so appreciate the support being available because University of New England is still in Oregon. If we're all accountable, then we have to educate ourselves and start figuring out how can we do constructive things in our community so everyone can live in health and peace and so on and so forth for everyone. And I don't have the information. I don't know what to do. And you provide it. I'm so grateful.
That's great. That's very encouraging. Thank you. Thank you. Other folks, talk to us. Please don't make us stand up here with each other because we can talk to each other anytime. Okay. The brother with the Yankees cap.
I'm from North Florida. I'm not a Yankees.
That's all right. My husband's from New York, so he appreciates the hat.
But I am a Lakers fan. But before that, I just want to thank you because I am alumni. I mean, actually, I can't say alumni. If you're an SEI, self-announcement, it's like a lifetime thing. And Mr. Tony Hobson, he saved a lot of people's lives. He saved my life. He saved a lot of black kids' lives. So self-announcement has been tremendous for the black community, particularly in North and Northeast Portland. Can y'all hear me?
But the camera can't.
I can't do that. Oh, the camera can't?
The camera can't.
All right. So, in regards to one of the comments that you made, sir, I forgot what your name. Okay, Mr. Miller-Jones. Me and a fellow colleague of mine, I'm a student here at the University of Oregon. I'm also a Portland Public School student. We were just talking about diversity, in particular at the University of Oregon. And
me and my colleague were actually having this conversation yesterday. You said that we can't teach diversity. We must teach these African American kids about being black. And being over here as a grad law student, as well as a student, as well as a undergraduate student at the University of Oregon. I've been really, especially this year, and with my position, I do recruitment of kids, supposedly students of color. But I've been having a hard time because everything that I seem to be doing in regards to recruitment and in regards to diversity, it seemed to my blackness, my identity as African American, has seemed to get camouflaged by the University of Oregon. By the system and by the programs that they have for us. I guess the question that I would have that I have for you and that I also have for you is, how can we say we want to be taught about African American history? Well, I think that it's extremely important to have allies. You can't do anything without allies. You can't do anything without a coalition of people that work with each other. But I want to learn more about African American history. I want to learn more about my history, and it's kind of frustrating to me when I feel like my identity as a black man is continually to be camouflaged as identity of an individual of color, and in a sense putting my identity as a black man as a second class. So how do we get this across to the university? I know Dr. Alex Asenso is a great colleague, but how do we do this without seeming like we're outcasting others, and without seeming like, when we say something and we're passionate, we can seem to be angry, which we're not. It's emotion and it's passion. I guess that's my question, is how do we do that?
Professor, I'd like you to speak to that. While you're getting the microphone, let me say this. I don't mind when people think I'm angry. Now, I'm not a black man, I'm a black woman, so anger on me feels different for other people. But yeah, I am. I remember being on this campus long ago and having a really good time, track town and track meets and recruitment fairs and STEM things back in the 80s. Remember all of that? And lots of good talk about things that should happen. And I guess I should say it. I'm standing on U of O's campus, so and it's a place where open discourse can happen, and I've said it in other places, so I will share it here. The U of O doesn't do a good enough job of graduating African Americans. It doesn't. They get to this campus and often they wash out. They get to this campus and many of them are on athletic scholarships and they do their bit and then they're done. Others get here and they get student loans and then they leave after a couple of years with some loans and a few credits. It's not good enough. Which they have to pay back. Right? So this is a great university and it can do better. So being angry about it is actually a very reasonable thing. And if you're not angry about it, it means you don't care enough. I care deeply that young people are on this campus trying to receive an education that they need to become the people that we want them to be to flourish in our country and in our state. So folks who aren't angry, aren't paying attention, or don't care enough. So you get to be angry because you are also active, because being angry alone is not enough. So I'm giving you this gift, just a little bit of it, hope to when you're in those spaces, think of those of us who aren't in the room with you, but we are, because we're angry too. Professor? So
what students across this country from about 1969 through about 75 or 76 had to link together and find allies to convince universities that they must provide you with courses about your culture, your history, etc. You have to be included. Your question draws a strong spotlight onto a dynamic. It's really okay for universities to bring students from any kind of background in the world into the university, so long as they agree to the tacit assumption that you're here to assimilate and to be like us. That's what the program is. So when people began to have special recruitment, so-called affirmative action. So elements in the establishment decided that it was illegal, and they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed. You could not have selective admissions, and by implication, selective courses and so forth and so on. So now universities decided that the Supreme Court misunderstood the issue. The issue wasn't to favor African Americans or Native Americans or Latino or Asian Americans. The issue was to provide a rich, diverse educational experience for all the students, i.e. white students. So some of us then made the move to insert equity, because that's not diversity, that's equity. It's getting the playing field even, to be inclusive of everybody, not to have a course on ethnic something, but to have a course on Latino experiences in the Southwest and African Americans in the Northwest and so forth. That's what we need. And you have a right to insist. And if you're the only one, I'll come and stand with you in whatever office you have to go to here to make the case that you don't want to be included in a generalized course on cultures in America. You want a course on African peoples in the United States and their experiences. You want a course on the Comanches and what happened to them, and the Algonquins in the East, and so forth. That's an education. It's specific. It's culturally specific curriculum. That's what you need to be working for. And I'll stand with you if nobody else will.
Inyanga, have you done organizing work at the university here?
No, not yet. I definitely want to.
It sounds like that was an invitation, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I'll be back whenever you want me to.
Okay.
I'd like to add on to that. We talk about coalitions, and I guess I come from the other side of it because I went to Howard University. I went to a black school because I didn't want to deal with that problem. So I think what we need to start teaching our people, black people, the power of the dollar. So if you're recruiting, how do you recruit to have somebody come someplace where they're not appreciated? Just like people say, vote with your feet. Do that. If the schools in Oregon aren't contributing to your experience, bring your dollars elsewhere. Learn to force these structures to recognize your buying power. That's the system we're in. It's a capitalist system. The dollar matters. And I guess that's what I've had to learn. The one thing we all are in this country are consumers. So let's start teaching our high school students. Let's start teaching children that are coming up. Start paying critical attention to the institutions you're giving your money to. And start learning that if you want my dollar, you have to cater to my needs, my desires, my wants.
We're going to take a few more minutes because I would hope that other folks will chime in and sort of share their thoughts and also ask other questions.
The mic is hot. Who wants it?
Yeah, my only comment is that coalitions can play an important role depending on how they are built and depending on the kind of politics that takes place around those coalitions. Very critical, I would suggest.
I agree with you absolutely. One of the things the premise that we start off with when we're talking about coalitions, at least at the Urban League of Portland, is that we are unapologetically black. Doesn't have anything to do with putting other folks down, right? Just because I'm black and I'm proud doesn't mean you can't be Latino and proud. In fact, I hope that you are, because we'll get along better that way, right? And part of me being free to be me and doing me, as they say, I hope provides an example for other folks to do the same, so that when we come together in coalition, we can actually get to work and not apologize for who we are or worry about what other people think about what we do. We can actually get the work done. One of the other things I just want to suggest real quickly is, in my work, when people sort of start to shy away or become uncomfortable with it, replace African American with woman. in whatever the context is, right? It would be nice. We have a history class, but man, we'd love to have a class related to women's history, women's studies. Everybody's fine with that. It's totally acceptable. Okay, let's change that. African American studies. Why is it different? Sometimes having the conversation in that context can help ease it for some people to see things in a different way. Who has the mic now?
Yeah. So I've been in conversations about this idea, and I just was in a 4J conversation yesterday about Black Lives Matter. And one of the things I talked about, and since we're talking about the state of Black Oregon, was that, do Black Lives matter? And you talk about internal coalition building. I think there's an issue, because I've talked to Black Americans about Africa, and they've been repulsed. I'm not African, I'm Black American. And so I think this really goes to the core of some of the issues that we're talking about. So the whole idea of curriculum is not that I don't want to have a Black course about Northwest America. I want to know about the blackness of humanity. The science is here. We haven't caught up to the science yet here at this university. And so I think we need to demand even more than just African American course of study. We need to understand that all the liberal arts have their beginnings in Africa. And I think there's really a core question that we are not even pushing hard enough on, and it does have to do about Black lives truly mattering. African Americans are descended from Africa. But I think that, people will argue with me about that. But and so if we're arguing about that, then I think our 3-year-old people we were talking about earlier will see that argument and be confused. So anyway, I think that's some of the deeper ideas we need to think about when we talk about curriculum and how and what they're going to be teaching at this school. I'm pushing for fundamental change of the diagram of the paradigm. And the paradigm to this day still says that African Americans came to civilization during the last 500 years. And we know that's not true. But if we act like that's true, we're going to get the same results.
Can I ask another question, and just in our final 3 minutes? Imagine that I haven't been to Eugene in 15 years. What do I need to know about it? What information would you want to share with me, with Nyanga, with Tamika, those of us who are here from the Urban League, those of us who do social justice work? Please.
Well, we just moved here in the last year, and the thing that everybody told us was there's a lot of homeless people here, and there's an issue going on with that, but nobody's doing it. And that's a cross-racial issue. Thank you.
Sorry. So my name is Brina Callo. I'm actually a junior in the Department of Public Policy, Planning, and Management, which is one of the sponsors of this event. And
thank you.
Oh, I'm sure they would say yes. And no, you're welcome. So first off, I would love if we could talk to the Urban League more, actually, about how you could help out the 3 p.m. department. We actually have only one professor right now, and we're a small department. We only have 11 tenure-track faculty professors, but only one of them actually talks about specifically issues like gentrification, public participation in diverse communities. His work is mostly around those who are Latino, Latina, Chicano, and Chicana, and he does incredible work, but he's one person, and unfortunately is not a superhero, even though he seems like it sometimes. On that note, I'm also a transportation advocate here in Eugene and Springfield, particularly around transit. And one of the problems that I think we're facing, particularly in the issue of transportation, which is so interdependent, tying into a lot of the issues that the report discusses, such as housing, getting to employment, which is huge. One of the prevailing attitudes we've had, and I'm going to actually bring up a direct quote from somebody who I work with on these issues, and this is the attitude of many who are transportation advocates. I'm not particularly partial to equity critiques around transportation. The current system of transportation is probably the most unequal system we could create, so anything that expands choice, low cost, not age dependent, etc., is the right thing. And that is counterproductive to what we need to achieve in the long run, and I think also to certainly not inclusive, particularly paying attention to a lot of the issues that those in planning are facing, like gentrification and things like that. And so I guess with mindfulness that this person is also somebody who teaches in our department, these are the things that planners are being taught in our department, and these are the attitudes that are being heard, these are the attitudes that advocates in our community have. And so I guess my question is, I don't know how to move forward with that other than to continue being a pain in the neck and saying things and gathering with other people my age. But I guess that's kind of just a very scatterbrained thought of where, we're at.
Professor, Mr. Council, will you bring us home? Well, I can address that issue to a certain degree because I spent 7 years on the LTD board, and I was also on the national board of APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. You're looking at two issues in your question here. One, let me say this. I have gone into many rooms across this country and dealt with many planners over the years, and I've been involved in public service. Finding an African American, Latino, or any other planner of color is like finding a needle in a haystack. So one of the things that we have to do beginning is to begin to integrate the planning community and get more students active and involved in becoming planners, because these are the people who are deciding what your cities and communities are going to look like in the future, and specifically your transportation systems. So if they have an orientation more towards bikes than they do towards transit or other stuff, that's the direction that the plan is going to go. But more importantly, equity issues is something that we have had to fight on a national level for a long time. And so you'll see many CEOs, and I know a number of African-American CEOs and a very few number of Latino CEOs of transit agencies that are fighting this battle as we speak. And as we look at what we have here in this community and across the country, transit and other public transportation options are grossly underfunded. And there's a reason for that. There's a plan behind that. There's a cadre of people in this community that are pushing against bus rapid transit, which is a key element of expanding access to the system and creating further and deeper access and penetration in our neighborhoods and communities. And those people have money and they have traction. Yes, and the other thing too is that people in the activist community around transit are not organized in building those coalitions of natural folks that should be together, because the vast majority of transit-dependent people in this country are people of color. Do you know that? When I grew up in Cleveland, my mother never did learn how to drive. When my father died, she sold the car, kept the house, we rode the bus, we rode the trains. I didn't have a car till I was 23. And there are a lot of people in this community that cannot afford cars, but we continue to suck away the access to transportation. In 2010, when I was on the LTD board, we had to cut service 25% because we did not have the revenue to support it. So when you look at these issues and look at these things and look at planners, look at who are doing the plans, I walk in the room, state conference. I did a state conference of planners where I was a speaker. Their whole room was white. Lily white. I mean really white. You know? And I've seen, in my 30 years, I think I've seen 3 planners come through the 3 p.m. program at the University of Oregon. African-American ones. And they got out of here in a heartbeat. Got their degree, boom, I'm out. I'm bouncing. Because they were in demand. It was like I don't know if some of you were old enough to remember Wild Kingdom, but it's like one of those things. Marlon Perkins has now found the one black planner in the wild that now we're going to extract and bring into civilization. And unfortunately, That's not a joke. It literally is like that. So we need to be involved in other disciplines than social science and some other stuff that people assume that we're all going to be in. And we need to get into those ball games, because those people that you're talking about are usually never going to be able to wrap their heads around our issues unless it's about money, or the fact that you have to break into their cocktail conversations. Because those people go to the same cocktail parties to talk to the same people and never talk to people that look like me or George or any of the rest, some of the rest of us in this room. So,
thank you for that. Listen, there is a growing party outside.
Right.
It's sort of fun to be in here talking about these issues and hearing the music outside, but I won't. I won't stand here and merely enjoy that in case some of you are ready to wrap it up. But I do want to thank Jonathan Cain very much for pulling together this event. He's a member of the Urban League of Portland Social Justice Leadership Cohort. And one of the things that people involved in our social justice program are responsible for during the year-long program is seizing the opportunity to be a leader. And this is an example of the kind of things that we can do all across our state when folks want to be engaged and want to be involved. So I hope that you will take him as an example. Spend some time after we break here, go in the back, get some food, get some beverage, talk to Jonathan, talk to Nyanga, talk to Tamika, talk to each other about some of these issues, because we're going to stick around for a little bit to continue the conversation. Professor, there's something you wanted to add?
Just on the homeless comment, connect to the essay about the impact of stress and nutrition on children's development. That's a place you can specifically link up that concern. It's in the report.
It's all in the report. Thank you very much for that. Again, you can download it at ulpdx.org/SOBO, or you can buy a copy in back. I think we still have a few hard copies, but if we run out, they're pre-orders and we will mail it to you. Thanks very much for coming. We really appreciate your interest.